Hey, welcome to the first Sanity for Sound podcast. I'm Terry Ben. I'm a music producer, film composer, and recording, mixing, and mastering engineer. And we're here at Switzerville Sound Retreat. And my first guest is just a longtime collaborator and friend of mine, Matt Wilson. He's also played in the band Letdown, a couple other bands before that. How you doing?
Not bad, Terry. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So Matt and I have been talking about starting a podcast for a while. Well, both of us respectively. I'm like, hey, I want to do this podcast. I just want to have some good conversations with people that I know and have worked with, or at least have kept in touch with. So a lot of times we get off the phone and we're like, that should have been a podcast.
Exactly.
Or people should have heard some of the stuff we dissected there, because I just think it's stuff that people need to hear. There's a lot of just people putting up a smoke screen of everything's great. It's just all, the highlight reel of social media. And then, but there's not quite enough talking about the gritty, the gritty stuff that goes on. And then you have some of the, you're hearing about a lot of the 1%ers, but you're not hearing about the other 99%.
Totally, dude.
People just struggling with what they're doing. That's why today's episode is called Redefining Success. And just Matt and I are going to just discuss a little of our experiences with that. And so let's maybe start with I don't know. One thing that came up for me was before you started the band Letdown, there was another band called Unit 33. That's the band that was the first chunk of time I knew you. So, it was I
was going to say, does it blow your mind that around this time would be about 15 years that I've been coming to this studio?
That's crazy, because you showed up, your mom drove you down in a snowstorm.
Yeah.
And we had a common manager, because I was still in a band at the time. So he's record this young punk band. I got to do the guitars and then and drums, and then that Jesse guy got to mix it.
Yeah.
Which was cool. So anyways, I was working, and then you guys show up sniffle nose, and it was what? This is awesome, kind of. So we crunched out those two singles. So to come from that to this is nuts. Yeah. And even where you are right now is you're kind of coming out of a bit of you kind of took a break from it for a while. So that's part of the redefinition of how we view stuff. But let's start back with that time where Unit 33 crossed over to Letdown. And I remember just things were getting a little uncomfortable. You kind of had an image of how you wanted to be, and it wasn't adding up for you. So it was kind of becoming a bit of, you were getting into a negative cycle with that. So can you talk a bit about that?
Totally. So, I mean, you can go by the name there, the standard number thing with an early 2000s pop punk band, Sum 41, Blink-182. That's definitely what I tried to define myself as, and me and my friends included. Early on, that's all I wanted. I found myself trying to be other people, and whether it was Derek Whibley or Tom DeLonge from Blink. And I certainly look back these days and wish that I followed maybe a little bit better of a guitar player or a singer to follow it in my earlier years. But it played a big part of what my sound did become, our sound did become in Letdown. But it was getting to a point where we were trying so hard to be somebody else that it was you kind of touched on there. It's the sound just, no matter what we would record, and it was it's not that it didn't sound good. It sonically was pleasing to your ear, but it didn't. First of all, it didn't sound like Sum 41 or Blink-182, which was throwing me for a loop, because it's well, that's all I'm trying to be. I'm almost not ripping off the songs, but you're listening to that and then directly going and writing something, trying to be that. And it seems so much farther away from that than when finally, I remember it was in this room, actually, maybe a little bit different of a setup, but it was you and maybe a couple of the other guys that said why are you trying so hard to be that? Just let it go.
Well, and at that time it was some of the later bands, the 5-piece kind of band, and that was your latest evolution, right before this breakthrough. But
that whole kind of Pure Noise Records, not indie, but it was not,
it was more techie, and it was a bit more polished.
Exactly.
And something too that before, like you said, you would listen to it and never quite be happy with it. That's just because like you hadn't accepted you yet.
Yeah.
Right. That is
Exactly.
am I wrong in saying that?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And it was at that when it was like, you know, embrace, don't try to pretend like you're this band from Toronto or from California or something. It's like, no, we're kind of these like blue collar, you know, kids from Oshawa, Ontario, you know, Canada's Motor City. Like, and as soon as we embraced that, we, you know, then we came out in 5 days, recorded our first, or right then, the Skin and Bones
I would
EP.
say that was still what you're talking about. Was you basically put out a Unit 33 release as Letdown.
Exactly.
You needed to like solidify it for yourself. But
yeah.
But the bottom was the first EP, and that was the clip we heard at the start of the episode.
Yeah.
That was placement, and that's where we realized like you had clicked into like the
Totally.
right thing. It was like this image of just like cigarette butts and
Yeah.
like, you know, dirty vans, and that's what it was. So why try to, you know, sound and chase these other people's lives
Exactly.
and go, oh, like look, I have this unique identity, you know.
Yep. And for so long, like we were always kind of younger. There was lots of different members in high school and stuff. But when we as soon as we became Letdown, I remember even thinking like, oh, well, maybe I should just be a vocalist, you know, and with the, you know, your arm up in the air and the microphone like this. I remember having that conversation. And I remember we had like 3 jams where we brought in other guitar players and stuff. And once again, it was like, well, now the songs are getting there, but this doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
Like I'm supposed to have a guitar. And there were several occasions where we even brought in a second guitar player, which wasn't that it wasn't our sound, but like on the recordings, we always overdubbed, you know, several guitars, but there was never really like a definite lead. Usually, if there was a lead, it was
kind of like harmonics.
Yeah, or like it was more just a riff, and you know, Jaco would handle the rhythm on the bass, but it was there was several times we just tried to be something we weren't, and as soon as every time we fell back into that 3-piece mentality where it was, you know, and at that time it was me, Jake, and Ryan, it just was, and it was so much easier to be that because we weren't trying to be anything other than ourselves.
100%. And like I think that you sing with the guitar, like that's the kind of player you are. When I would see you on stage, or you just like you operate with it. So it was kind of, I don't know, to see you trying to do the like acrobatic thing, like I just couldn't see it, just because it's one of the, you know, in certain singers, like when they try to get the guitar off, like it's like, oh, that doesn't feel right. I want to see you playing guitar. And hey, dude, everybody's got to go through those
definitely
cycles.
Part of me, to the point where even like recording vocals in the studio I find it almost weird. Like even I find I'm doing stuff with my hands where you know and you know the standard hand on the earphones in the studio thing. But yeah, the guitar definitely, I can't, it's a part of me, even as far as like the, you know, the look on stage and like how I perform and more of the entertainment side of it. Like that's just part of me, whether I'm, you know, throwing it around or punching it and making my hand bleed, but it just 100%. Became part of me.
And like, so what happened after that was we created that EP, and all of a sudden, like Spotify was pretty new. Our friend Jason Ogie, shout out to you.
Yeah,
he was digging into like Spotify and saying, you know, I found like here's the best like streaming sort of platform thing, and so we get it up there. Because I remember, I remember just to hit on this, because I tell this story all the time, because I remember Jason and we were having a meeting about the release of it and stuff, and kind of picking a release date, and he had mentioned this new streaming service Spotify, and how, you know, the internet was saying it was going to be the new way of listening to music, and I was like, I don't think we need to do that, man. Let's just like put it on iTunes, and you know, this is pre-Apple Music and everything. Like it was iTunes, you still got CDs made and sold none, and it was like I almost didn't do it. And you talked me into it, saying, well, just try it. What do you have to lose, right? Yeah. And sure enough, we released that. And that, to be fair too, like that stuff was going on. It's just you guys hadn't rolled over to it yet. Exactly. Like, but Spotify was still relatively new. Like I was, you know, it seemed like Jay had done a lot of research on it. And just, I think him traveling, like he kind of had a better like align on what was going on
Yeah.
with that, because and so yeah, we saw like 10,000 streams. We're like, that can't be right. We actually
I remember
thought
I called you. I was like, something's wrong.
we thought it was a fuck up. And then it just kept going, and then that's when I started digging through Spotify, and I realized, oh, you just got put on like these massive playlists.
Yeah.
Like, we're up there now. You're looking at your band and then all the bands that we all idolized
Exactly.
and grew up with, and we're like, whoa, that's crazy. Like, we're right up there. Yeah. Being played with those groups, like, they're
while being ourselves.
All being ourselves. We did it in this room, the booth there. I think we might have still had I might have still had it. The RV.
trailer was there.
Yeah. So, and
We
you
cut
guys
that in 5 days.
It was stinky. I remember you guys were actually, it's a funny thing. You guys were smoking so much on the deck. My ex at the time was like, the window was open. It was summer. And she's like, I can smell cigarette smoke. There was so much like cigarette smoke just coming around the side of the house and going up into the bedroom window.
Yeah.
I was just like, yeah, these motherfuckers never stop smoking.
Yeah.
There was like just an ashtray, like, brimming, but like,
I was wondering where that ashtray went when I was just outside.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to quit now, but
yeah, I got rid of that for your health, but yeah, for sure. But so anyways, and then I just think, like, I bring up that because that seemed like a sign that we're on the right path, and then people started to take notice.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is authentic. This is like, this guy's just being himself. These guys are being themselves.
Yeah.
And that, that brought us up to, like, kind of you guys hitting the ground right before COVID hit. That's basically like where that brought us to. And then, so now that kind of brings up a good shift point, because you went through all that. You guys did a bunch of shows, a bunch of touring, and, I think you had some label interest and, things were like, there were people that were taking notice. They weren't biting yet, but I feel like with some hard work, it was going to,
Yep.
You guys, I feel like, we're generating enough of your own grassroots following that would have grown to that point at some point.
And it's, it's so hard to look back because, as we all do, you look back and say, like, what could I have done differently to maybe, have gotten signed, or, did we make it or did we not? And it's like, that's why there's so many bands, especially in my age group, at least, that, we're coming on 30s. In our early 30s now and stuff, and everybody's buying houses, and we're trying to, and starting families. And I've seen so many of the bands that we came up with, they do this big like final show, or like they feel like they have to close it, and that's cool. I never wanted to do that, even though it's been, I think, almost 4 or 5 years now since Letdown's played a show. But to me, there's no need for that. I don't feel like, if I wanted to record a song tomorrow and put it out as Letdown, that with the guys, like, I don't see a reason to call it quits or anything like that. It became such a part of who we were that to me there was no reason to really final show or anything. Not that we were planning on doing that anyway.
Yeah.
COVID threw a huge wrench in everything.
And it just shut things down. And I think just it was in the process of things slowing down, and there were certain things like we just couldn't do. Other things that maybe we'd been suppressing came up, like that, things we wanted to do. So you kind of shifted into like carpentry, like really heavily.
Yeah, I got really into woodworking. And it's funny because a memory just came up on my Facebook the other day. And it was a post I had made when I had first gotten my first, like, it was just, I was framing houses for this guy, my dad's buddy. And it was right before, like, we started touring and stuff, but I knew I needed a job. So my dad's like, oh, here. And I had made this Facebook post after the first day I worked saying, I am not a tradesman. I will not do this for the rest of my life. And at that time, it was just a means to an end. I went to work so I could pay to go on tour and make records and stuff. And luckily, we got to a point kind of where, the Spotify was actually generating enough to almost pay for the next record, at least. We weren't, rolling in dough, but it was enough to at least keep the machine rolling.
It was perpetuating the productions.
Yeah.
And then you guys could focus, like, the touring sales and, like, merch sales on, like, putting you back on the road to further your exposure, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, it turned into where I found an interest in woodworking and, making things and just working with my hands a lot more. And as the touring and stuff was not doing what it was at the beginning, at the beginning it was like, we were tour in the States, and the bottom was doing really well on Spotify. And I remember being at shows and people being like, I drove an hour and a half to see you. And I'm like, this is wild, you know? And I felt like I was, you know, making it, so to speak. And then when that wound down, I started moving more towards the carpentry things and the, you know, working with wood. And eventually I found myself almost like running from music because it was like, oh, it's not working. I'm not making it. It became a failure. I felt like I was failing at music so bad that I jumped to that because it was something that, you know, at least the, you know, so the music industry couldn't judge me on, you know, being successful at.
Well, dude, and I think that's like some kind of mechanism like we have, like,
yep.
You put something in the failure department. It's like a box.
Yeah.
But you know it's coming back out.
Yeah.
But for the time being, you put it there because you just need to fucking forget it for a while.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
and to the point where, like, during COVID and stuff, I remember at the beginning talking with our newer drummer, Zane, being like, yeah, don't worry, man. Like, they say it's only a couple weeks. Like, we'll get back. I still had plans on my computer written down of like the tours we were planning, that we were working on demos and stuff still. And then I just shut everything out. Like, I don't know what it was, but something happened with me where I was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And I shut it out so bad that I didn't talk to him for, you know, years, like coming up to like just earlier this year or last year, finally kind of reaching out to him, and it ruined our friendship almost. So
yeah. And I mean, like, when I played in a band, like, dude, I spent a lot of time in the negative, like in my bands, and like the way I was with every situation, like everything became not good enough for me.
Yeah.
And I wish I'd realized, like, I'm in a van with my buddies and this is fucking cool.
Yeah.
Like, we're across Canada right now. And yeah, there was 5 fucking people at the show, but we're out here.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where you start to, you know, kind of shift into the next thing, but also, you know, I wish I'd given myself, and I'm sure you wish you gave yourself maybe a few more pats on the back and said, you know what, like, I did that. I need to put it away for a while.
Yeah.
And then, and I mean, for me, like, when I packed up being in a band, like that, man, like it's a trigger for me, you know, like one thing I really want to do is, in the name of it being uncomfortable, is get on stage again one day, just because I'm so fucking terrified of it now. And there's still a lot of weird feelings I have associated with like being in a band. Like, it was just such a, you know, it's a very tormenting time for me.
The other thing is being in a band, I've always said, is like being in a marriage, but with like 3 to 4 to 5 people. It's like everybody has their own view of what they want it to be for them and for everyone. And to navigate that is such a difficult thing. And I mean, that's why you see like there might be 2 or 3 bands, at least in like the music I've followed, that stayed together, like all original members the whole time, you know, like
100%.
Green Day or something's like one of the only ones that actually, from inception to now 30 years, like same guys writing music together.
Well, dude, and this kind of brings up one of the points we had, like success versus validation. And that's like how much of it how much of what we were chasing was actually just the validation of others rather than the goal itself.
Exactly.
And that bleeds into a lot of stuff.
Well, that's I think about that all the time, and me and my wife talk about it. Like, I got in a van, toured around with my best friends, played shows, whether it was to 5 people or 150 people. We were out in, like, I remember in high school, one of my biggest dreams was to go to California. You know, that for every like pop punk kid or whatever,
1,000%.
To go to California was like the thing. And we did that. But during it I don't think I was appreciating what was going on. Like, our album was doing really well on streaming services. I was with my best friends in a van, touring the entirety of the United States and Canada. And it's not till now that I look back and go, well, that to me is successful. That's if I could if I could show that to my 14-year-old self, what would my 14-year-old self think?
He'd be shitting.
Exactly.
Going like, you're gonna do that?
Yeah.
That's fucking awesome. Except in the moment, we're like, why was I so fucking miserable?
Because I was comparing myself to everybody else that was doing a little bit better. But guess what? The only thing I was looking at was social media, Instagram. Well, this band's playing to this many people and we're only playing to this many people.
Oh, dude.
This band has this many streams and we only have this many streams. And it's only coming now, like I'm seeing on social media, some of these bands that I would consider successful. And we can get into what we actually define success as, but I would consider that they were making a living off of it, at least enough to, you know,
perpetuate.
Yeah, to
the
perpetuate
existence of being in
to
a
me
band.
that's successful.
You're not working. You're not going home and working a job. Yeah,
but you see some of the mental health of these people, and they're open about it, and it's not good. And I've been there,
dude. Even in the like the film composing industry and the TV, like there's a serious, like, you know, I think there's a lot of mental health things going on that nobody's talking about, but it's a lot of isolated creators, and we're all looking at the next person's achievements through screens, and it's pretty fucked up, man.
Which,
you know?
Same thing, if I can touch on this for a second, I remember when we were still like recording little EPs here, and you were mainly kind of a band tracking guy.
1000%.
You were talking about getting into composing, and you had, you know, you taught yourself piano, and we're learning all the synths. I remember the synths showing up and being like, sometimes we just like smoke some and, you know, get at it. And it was like, whoa. And then now, like, if you could show yourself, that guy, you know, probably almost 10 years ago now, what you've gotten into, what would that guy think?
Well, that's it. And I recently just came out of like a big slump. Like I was like, I had all these, because, you know, my fiance Michelle is like you know, she's getting to be a really established composer. And like, so I got all these great gigs probably earlier than I should have gotten. Now, to be fair, I had the skill set to jump in. Yeah. But it gave me a false representation of where I was in the industry. And so it was like a couple years of being like straight, and then just, you know, the floor fell out for like 3 months. And I like, at first, the first month was like, cool, I'm just chilling. Then I got really uncomfortable and I started feeling really off, and all this stuff came up to the surface, like this type of construct we're talking about, ego construct, where we're like, I wasn't doing all these things because I was worried about what people were thinking of me and stuff. And if I do this and they know I'm not that good at that, you know, or whatever, and it's fucked that, and I had to cut all those things away yet again. And how many times in our life have we had to do that? Absolutely. But this one was a big one. I was like, I need to fucking shed this off and fucking. And then I just started doing all like stuff like this podcast. I'm like, I just got it. And we talked about this, like, just, so once you it was kind of like one of those moments that you had with the Unit 33 crossing the Letdown. Fuck what everybody thinks. I just, because that's what builds up in your head because of what we're talking about, the social media. Exactly. Sort of seeing everybody all like, I mean, how many of us don't wake up and use our phone? Oh, it's fucked. You're like, here's everybody's highlight reel at 6 a.m. That's what you're wiring your brain for. The same as your childhood gets wired a certain way. You're wiring in like, you're not good enough every fucking morning. But it's funny you say that too, because I took like a huge break, and I mean, I've never been that good at social media. And that was something that I look back on and, well, what if I was better at social media? Would the band have done better? And it's like, you can't do that to yourself. But so I took, especially during COVID, took a huge break from it. I didn't even look at it. But what that did too was kind of, I wasn't seeing anything. I kind of went to a total, and I've finally moved out to the country, which I always wanted to do ever since I came to this studio. And same thing, went so far into the woodworking and stuff that I didn't look at anything. I started dressing differently, dude. And I mean, it's funny now because you see all the bands and they're wearing Carhartt and stuff, but like been wearing that for a while, just working, but so far away from myself. And then I remember I had like this mental breakdown, and my wife was like, well, like, you never wear real clothes anymore. I'm like, what do you mean real clothes? And it's like, you're not the same. So I realized, I'm like, I'm not even this isn't who I am either. Like, and yes, people can change and become. You had to try on a different set of clothes though, and you realized I don't want to wear these every day, basically, right? No, and not that I don't still like working with wood and stuff, but it was when something clicked in my brain. I'm like, why am I so miserable? Oh, because you took away the one thing that's been the constant in your life since you were like 9 years old. And that got you through probably how many things, like how many times have we had that energy where we just like, that was the outlet. That was you're just like, it's why we started doing it. I'm pretty sure, and it's hard to say, everybody's a different reason, but for the most part, especially in the punk rock, scene, we started doing it because we were people that by all rights shouldn't have been playing music. No. But punk rock, like, fucking gave us that, like, like, cause I had albums like Metallica and Soundgarden and just big rock records, but it wasn't until hearing like Bad Religion and Offspring and shit, early Blink and Green Day, that you're like, oh, there's 4 chords, you know, and that made it accessible for us. And we had that music, like, you and I can't deny it. Punk rock hit us in that certain way, and it was about just that angst and a certain energy.
It was more feel than the. Think about all those records; they sound like garbage. Most of them, the early ones, you know, they sound like garbage, but it's the energy and the feeling that you get.
It's like, funny when you go back and listen to some of them. You're like, whoa! I used to think this sounded so big, and it's like so thin. But that, to be fair, they were working on, you know, the like classic gears still. You know, they're crossing over into, you know,
most of them are
Pro Tools, I guess, in the early 2000s. But
yeah, mostly like 4 tracks, I guess, and 8 tracks.
Well, or the bigger studios had probably like decent reel to reel, and I think like Pro Tools became like, you know, I think the early versions were kind of used for capture, maybe some editing capture. Then maybe they'd pop that back out to the mix console. Like it was more like a tape safety. I don't know that for sure, but that's like when it was not the DAW that it is today, where you're like, basically it's like you can form anything in there. It's insane.
And wasn't it like $10,000 for a Pro Tools set? Like,
even more. Like,
really?
Well, yeah, like when I got into this, like, I had this, like, their Pro Tools kind of their lighter version. Yeah. And it was super buggy because it was going all through Firewire, and I got really fast at editing. So the graphics were just shutting down the program. Oh. So that's why I'm like, well, I guess I should buy the $15,000 HD system. And like, it was great. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing with it, but I learned that, I actually fell on top of like a system that allows artists to hear themselves like really nicely, like with the way that it operates. Like it's more like a console. Like it's actually still running to this day. It has everything plugged into it. Yeah. So that old Mac computer still chugging, that old HD system still chugging. But anyways, so to be fair, we're talking about like those albums sound like shit, I guess, and you know, fucking it was. But back then, it hit you like a ton of bricks, right? Yeah,
exactly.
But yeah, like so. And then another thing we were kind of talking about too is because of the social media, like how many times do you talk to somebody that you thought they had it all?
Oh yeah,
and then they're fucking miserable.
Yeah,
and you're like, and we kind of talked about this too, like so. It's really kind of separating like how you making decisions on like how people see you versus what's really right for me. Cause you know how, again, I said, maybe you're at a dinner party and somebody you really think is cool and you want the respect of says, it's cool that you do this. So you do that, even though you're like, actually, I don't really like doing that. But these people thought I was cool for doing that. So I'm going to keep doing that, you know?
And how long until inevitably it, like you said, boils over the surface and you're like, this isn't even who I am.
Well, exactly. And like I find with like if I'm, let's say we're out at a networking event or something and I'm talking with other like people that do the same thing as I do, like there's an energy when someone's like putting out like they're trying to project.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times it's people that don't need to. It's like, I know you're doing awesome.
Yeah.
And I try to like say that right away to kind of diffuse that energy. But another means of diffusion for me on that is like just bringing up something super Monday and like, I had to like snake the fucking toilet yesterday, you know? Like, it's not because like human. People, when I tell people like sometimes like, I'm working in film and TV now, they're like, oh, that sounds, and it's like, look, it's really cool, but there's also some really grind ass shit. So like you're sitting in this spot right here. Yeah. For like, you know, anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a day, sometimes longer. And there's, you know, and that was a big change for me just on a mental health level, because when there were bands here, it was exhausting in another way, but like, there was that social aspect. Yep. So like, it was kind of a party every day, where Absolutely. This is like, you're fucking by yourself. And like the people, like, you know, a director, like you might talk to them a few times and that's it. So it's so isolating,
and probably over email or some kind of,
and like, you don't know.
Do they like it? Do they not like?
That's a whole other conversation, I think, for an entirely different like podcast, because just the tone of email again, these digital things that we,
well, on the social media too, I remember when it first came out, it was like cool because we thought that it like took away, well, it was cool and it wasn't, because I remember, you know, the bands I looked up to were, and that's kind of transitions to a different thing, where the golden age of the music industry, like there was this mystery behind artists. You went to a show and then they came out and it was, oh my gosh, they're larger than life. Like they're not even real people
100%.
because you'd only see them on MTV or on some kind of, you know, television program or on the radio. And then social media brings it where, you know, now
it bridged the gap between you and their
and
everyday
they're
life.
posting what they're eating for dinner. So it was like, oh, okay. But now what it's what I think it's done anyway is it's made it so, you know, Susie down the road can show that she's has this magical life of whatever because she's only posting all of the good things about her life.
100%.
So it's instead of, you know, it's gotten rid of that gap between us and celebrities and stuff like that, because they can post what they ate for breakfast. But at the same time, it's made it so our peers appear to be doing so much better than you are because what you're seeing. And then of course, then we post this, try to combat that. And it's, what is that doing? It's making everybody look at the mental health of like the entire population.
1,000%
going downhill. They talk about it all the time. It has to be because of that.
And oh, dude, and like you have to run whenever you go on Instagram, and you know, it's taken me a long time to actually get to a point where like I actually genuinely feel stoked for people, you know, like, and not be like, oh, I'm lacking.
Yeah. And then
it doesn't automatically go to like, I'm lacking and yeah, there's envy. It's like, no, I'm stoked. Even when I'm like kind of having a down day, it's like, I'm still fucking pumped, you know, because who's to say you won't be there too? Yeah. You know, like only you're probably the only person telling you that. And you're also upset sometimes because nobody else is telling you that. And that's the way, like, that's the way it goes. Like, we kind of had this chat like a couple days ago where if you're climbing Everest, whatever your top of Everest is, it's gonna, more and more people are gonna drop off.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be you and maybe one or two other people at the very top with minimal resources before you hit the fucking summit. And that's not a bad thing. Like, you know, I think when you start like going down a certain road, just again, we know there's various psychologies behind that. Some people just, it's kind of like if you weren't kind of coming back into your creative self, and I was around you, like you kind of wouldn't want to be around me because I'd be reminding you of
exactly
like the thing you're trying to put in the closet. Totally. And so, and I think that sometimes you see your friends react to what you're doing a little bit, not the way you thought they would, but in their defense, like it probably just triggering something in them. It's not that they're directly jealous of you. They're just maybe jealous of a certain quality that, oh, maybe you have an opportunity that maybe I made a certain decision that takes that out of the equation, or maybe just I played the safe card because being a creative is very risky. Like, and it, by all accounts, seems to be a fucking money sucker.
Absolutely.
Like it never stops suckling resources. You know?
Exactly.
Your energy, but we do it because fuck, it's and so, you know,
I still do. Like last week, we started talking about how I'm getting back kind of into my creative self, and all I could think, you know, the negative comes in and it's like, well, what if I just, back then when, you know, my ego driven self was, you know, I just want to be the singer of Letdown and play guitar and be in a band. I don't want to, there was no other path for me in the music industry that wouldn't seem like some kind of failure. Where now I'm looking back going, well, shit, if I would have learned Pro Tools and stuff 10 years ago, what could I be doing now that's absolutely like in a creative space, and I wouldn't happen to be, you know, swinging a hammer every day. But
and why not do that now? It's exactly what you're talking about.
Is it too late?
No, it's not.
No,
it's absolutely, dude. Like, that's what we have to realize.
Yeah.
Like, there's a certain composer that a lot of people know, and like they are just killing it right now.
Yeah.
And then you look at like their like what I was like, I want to be that. Yeah. At least in that pocket so badly. You're so far from that, number one. Number two, you actually look at their credits and you're like, this person was scoring when I was 5 years old, actually scoring something. So I'm like, take it easy on yourself. You're on a good path. Yep. You're doing it. Like when I was mucking, like, cause I did my buddy Doug's film, and that was, that was cool. And I thought, it's funny when I go back and listen to that now, I'm like, oh my God, like, you know, and that's where, like, when I met Michelle, and like, I'm like, holy shit, here's a real composer. Yeah. Like, she played some stuff from this film called Harpoon, and I was like, holy fuck, like, that is insane. Like,
but funny enough, that didn't make you go, I suck. It made you say, I'm gonna get better.
Well, but at that time too, I was just getting the thirst back, because I was like, we were working on our albums. I was doing Acquire Ghosts, like, when out of Sweden, and like Jer and I were the country guy. We were doing stuff, so things were kind of a couple other bands as well. And I didn't have my eye on it, but it's funny, as soon as like Michelle gave me some of the opportunities, I was just like, I don't know. I just think that I'm like, I need to go into something totally weird and uncomfortable now, you know, because it seemed like such a vast industry, like, to me, that, and it is, it's like really weird, like how, like, when you work with bands, like, this band tells this band and this and that, and like that word of mouth thing, and you're kind of rolling pretty good, like, just from that. But this industry doesn't, it is word of mouth, but the connections are very strange. Like, it's like seeds that grow in strange environments you wouldn't think.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. So but just thinking and just looking down at what a few other things we thought we'd bring up. There was one other thing we should talk about, and that in our sort of like idea of what success is, especially for bands, like we kind of grew up still with where, again, what you talked about with like that gap between the band and no social media in between, that golden age of like success. Yeah. That was a version of success that, well, number one, even back then, was probably like a very small percentage.
Oh yeah.
To think of how many albums were like shelved for every album, that was huge. And then, but that was like kind of the older version of being fixated on that level of success.
Well, and such a weird time. Like, I know that there's a little bit of an age gap between us, but like, we came up looking at those bands, or at least for me, it was looking at bands like Blink, who I think I read somewhere that like after Enema of the State, like they all made enough money to live their lives like 3 times over comfortably. Yeah. Like, ridiculous. Like they were importing palm trees from Japan when they lived in California, where, you know, it's like ridiculous, right? Yeah. So that was like the standard I set for myself. I'm going to do that, you know, with my shitty guitar playing and, you know, whiny voice. And as we're coming up, you know, it all shifts in like Napster and LimeWire and all these, like, you know, downloading music and stealing music came about. And I mean, luckily, at least now it's shifted where people are paying at least a subscription a month, where there's some dollars coming in. But I would say like we're in a time where like musicians are probably making the least they've ever made. But the caveat to that is that it's also the easiest to get your music out there at the same time.
100%. Like, and just with the technology, like we didn't, like, you know, when you guys even were coming out here, like Pro Tools was like just becoming common in a few home studios. Like,
the home studio was
it wasn't like everybody and their cat had a fucking digital audio workstake.
Yeah, I can go buy a $200 interface.
At least got, you know, they've dabbled with it or they use it, and which is great. But so like those, like chasing those bands and chasing that,
very hard. To try to compare yourself to that. And I think there's even the bands that I would consider successful, they're making a living, they don't necessarily come back and work a day job when they get back from tours and stuff. That's who they were looking up to.
And that's like the downgrading we're talking about. Like, the point of that whole thing is, you start there. Like, one of the funny little things I used to, like, when I worked construction in my dad's rock quarry, I was like pretty miserable, but I always imagined like my favorite record label, like Epitaph Records, flying in from California on a chopper and landing and being like, yeah, you're signed. And I literally thought that every fucking day, man. That was like that was my salvation. And but things happen. Like I pushed that band into places like that I did, I didn't think I would do, like, even though they weren't what I set out to do. The middle ground was fucking success. Like, I mean, I was destined to be fucking working at a construction company, and instead I broke that fucking like that trajectory. And
absolutely.
I didn't fucking become one of the, at that time it was like, try to be the next fucking Pennywise or whatever, and skate punk band or whatever when I first got into it and started touring. But yeah, dude, so it's like that downgrading of just, it's not, I don't know if I want to call it like a downgrade. It's just like, oh, like what's realistic, and you got to be, I guess that comes back to that grateful thing. Like, I should be grateful for this. Yeah. I can't constantly be miserable because I don't have that, and that's, and I think that is redefining success. Like in at the end of the day, as it pertains to really anything, but this is like a music based sort of thing. So, but that's basically what we have to do. We have to go, oh, okay, like why am I not happy? I don't have this, I don't have that, but I have this, and I'm grateful, and I worked for this. Yeah,
exactly. I look at, it's funny now, I go into my little, I've now bought in a house and stuff, not off the music earnings, that's for sure. But, but I go into my little tiny bedroom, and I have my wall of guitars and all my gear and like all the tour posters and stuff. And that's when I start to, it's nostalgic for sure. And you all this rush of emotions, and I do feel success then. Like,
100%.
Like, there's not a lot of guys. No, I'm not a lot of guys that I know my age that could look and be like, look what you did. I remember my brother-in-law saying that to me one day. He pulled up some Spotify, and he did the math for me based on like, because a couple of those songs did really well with some of the playlists they got on. And he did the math of how many people were like listening right now. And I'm like, whoa, that's cool. He's like, how are you not proud? I'm like, I am. I guess I am.
Yeah. I know. Like, and you like,
but why does it
take
sad part
that? Was that, why did it take someone else to tell you? And that's kind of, I think, what we're trying to get it through to ourselves is like, hey, stop being so fucking hard on yourself. Yeah. Like, this is hard shit to do. Yeah. This is not an easy industry, whether like whatever side of the fence you're on. Like, exactly. Like I've done music production and, doing the film and TV stuff. It's like both sides are, it's hard. Yeah. It's emotionally taxing. It's fucking physically taxing. It's the whole thing. It's like trying to do this shit. You're stretched to a thread. Yeah. And then when that breaks, you fucking weave a new rope and you fucking go back out again until it, it snaps off again.
Well, and I think it's so important, like what I've tried to tell myself going forward, and almost coming back to your, Mount Everest analogy there, like you get to the top. Well, in order to get, you get to that top of that mountain and you see the next one that's a little bit taller, but in order to get to that one, you have to go back down
100%
before you can climb the next mountain.
That is a great fucking like piggyback on that analogy. I didn't even think of that, but man,
you can't
fucking
you can't just jump to the
next top.
Think
of mountains, right? Think of mountains like these audio waveforms, like our motion. They're like a fucking up and down cycle, and it's funny how the mountains are like that. That's so true. And sometimes you just got to climb down and put your feet up in the cabin in front of the fire for a bit, and then okay, you know what? I've been comfortable a little bit too long. It's time to get back out.
Be okay. Get comfortable with the bottom of the mountain.
And so we're getting close to the end, but you've got some plans to your redefinition of like what you want to do musically. So
I do.
Just what do you got planned like coming up here?
Well, so during COVID and stuff, and it's funny, during the carpentry thing, as much as I said I ran from music, I did run from music entirely. Like I didn't listen to music for almost 2 years. Like it was just podcasts about woodworking and trying to, That being said, I learned a lot about it, and I'm glad that I did that, because now I could build a house for myself if I wanted to. But when I found my, redefined my creative self again, it came back and it was, okay, well, what do I want to do? Letdown will always be a part of me, and, me and my best friends. So I'd like to revisit some of that. We've got some demos going now, and
which I heard some of, which sounded fucking sweet.
Oh,
so I'm
thanks,
stoked
dude.
for that. Oh yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And of course we'll be doing it. I'm sure
We were out at
we'll be
Jay's,
in-
remember? And you were
Oh,
we were
yeah.
around the kitchen table, and
Yeah.
we all did
Well,
mushrooms.
look,
and
I got so jacked on it.
Yeah,
The smile that brings me that's how I knew, like, I need to be doing this again.
yeah.
But I also realized, like, I want to be going forward. It's not too late. And you helped me realize that, like, to maybe, find a way to make money in the music industry, whether it's learning how to record, produce other bands. I love songwriting. So I'd love to work with other bands. And I'm not trying to, I'm not Rick Rubin. The hardest part will be kind of getting a catalog of stuff going, I suppose. But
And that's where you just get out there and
Yeah.
go, like, that if you go looking, like, you will find something.
Yeah.
And then it might not even be the thing. You might be, it's like
Yeah.
you're looking through the sand, you find one stone, you brush it off. You're like, wow, this is cool, but it's not for me. It's for you leave it for the next person.
exactly.
And you go and find the next one.
Exactly. And then the other thing is I've finally kind of compiled a bunch of songs. I've always kind of on the back burner of Letdown done some acoustic stuff. We did some of the Letdown songs acoustic. Gone Soft Volume 1. I'm sure we'll do Volume 2 one
Oh
day.
yeah.
But I've always had this love of, I got brought up, my mom always listened to country music, and it's funny, when I was younger, I hate country, but I loved listening to it. So I've kind of compiled a bunch of these kind of folky country songs that I'd like to put out under kind of a solo thing. So hopefully that'll be something that comes out relatively soon.
Yeah, well, we should record that, like, out by the fire,
Oh,
where we did all
totally.
that shit. Like, 'cause
Totally,
just
man.
get the fire going midwinter, like. Or,
And I'd love to just go. And that's something I want to have. There's no, not that Letdown has a box. I don't like to box anything in, but it definitely has a sound that we created that I'd like to.
Yeah.
It's like when I write, when I want to get rid of that angst and cut some of that punk rock energy, I think I'll push that into the Letdown realm, and then everything else can just, this solo thing I want to do is just anything else can be under that. There's no rules. you
Yeah,
know?
dude, and I get it. Like I'll spend, like, every 3 or 4 years I do one heavy song.
Yeah.
And I spend way too long on it, like stupid hours, but I
Yeah.
have to do it. I'm
Why
like,
not?
I know this is going, like, no, this is not profitable in any
Yeah.
way, but it's something that you just got to get out. So I think we'll cap it off now, because I think we could pretty much, like, fucking totally just crack into a whole other one.
Absolutely.
And we'll wait for that. Shout out to River Sound Studio, my brother Joe Ben. Thanks for this. See everybody next time.